Hey guys, Argent Templar here, with another argument in the Existence of God series. This is probably my second favorite after the cosmological argument, and this is, along with the cosmological argument, one of the two that really convinced me to be a deist at least. So without further ado, let's go into this. If there is no immortality, and by implication no God, then there is no virtue. Dostoevsky, if that's how you pronounce his name. So history. So this is a classical argument for the existence of God, and one that has been more or less consistently popular since the time of the Greeks. Some arguments like the cosmological or design argument have waxed and waned depending on the time in history. The moral argument has never really fallen out of style. It's pretty much consistently popular, and many people, particularly during the Enlightenment, like Hobbes and Kant, held on to this argument, even though as the reason why they weren't just full-out atheists. So this is a very important argument. So let's see here. So Thomas Aquinas advocated this as one of his famous 5 ways, or 5 proofs that God exists. Immanuel Kant and C.S. Lewis are other notable advocates. Keep in mind, C.S. Lewis was an atheist, an aggressive atheist, and he eventually became one of Christianity's greatest defenders, and this was one of the core arguments. So traditionally, this is an argument that materialists, I find at least, have the hardest time overcoming. This is the one where a lot of them will, particularly the new atheists, will kind of collapse and have a lot of trouble dealing with it. Particularly because a lot of the new atheists, as I think someone said in a comment on a previous video, aren't really atheists, they're secular humanists, where they hold to a lot of the same metaphysical moral principles as Christianity or deism, but there's nothing backing them up. So we get kind of the absurd spectacle of Richard Dawkins and some of these other guys advocating biological determinism, but if you bring up race or ethnicity or IQ or propensity towards crime or eugenics, they will say that's terrible, no, everyone's equal, even though nothing about their worldview would suggest that. So what is the argument? Essentially, the argument posits that objective moral laws or principles exist. Makes sense? And that these things are wrong in and of themselves regardless of culture or environment. For instance, an advocate of this position would posit that raping a child or killing a random person for no reason is always categorically wrong. In other words, as surely as universal gravitation exists, it is wrong to rape an innocent child. I don't really see a counter-argument. Generally speaking, cultural relativism is the main one, and saying, oh, well, they were raised a certain way, it's okay. Child marriage is okay if that's the culture. Female genital mutilation is okay if that's the culture. I don't think they are. I think they're universally wrong. I don't think a society can really exist on the basis of cultural relativism. I think you need standards, you need a way to judge things, you need something to be more than just a subjective personal preference. If you don't have some sort of objective moral law, then the idea that it's wrong to rape a child carries no more weight than I like the flavor vanilla. It's just a personal preference that other people can accept or reject. There's not anything higher to it, and we'll get into that. That is not to say that in reality it's not more complicated, and that choices are seldom black and white. Which is true. I mean, a lot of people like Vlad the Impaler, Constantine, the Crusaders, etc. had very difficult choices to make. They had to do evil to do good. They had to often act extremely brutally and kill a lot of people in pursuit of a higher cause. Whether or not it's worth it or not, whether or not the cost outweighs the benefit or the benefit outweighs the cost, is kind of a matter of personal opinion, and it can be a very hard decision to make. But that's not to say there aren't universal values. There aren't objective moral values that have a role to play. Because, let's look at Vlad the Impaler, for instance. The objective moral evil is torturing and murdering people. And I don't mean killing, like, when he killed the Turkish soldiers in war, that's fine, because that's acceptable under a moral system. I mean brutally murdering them. I mean, like, sticking stakes up their rectums while they were still alive. I mean, that's a moral evil. At the same time, to defend your country is an objective moral good. To stop the Turks from coming in who were going to enslave and rape and kill everybody, that was an objective good. So there is an objective evil and an objective good in that situation, but it's up to kind of the individual sometimes to mediate between them to try and figure it out. But that's not to say there aren't values, it's just often more complicated. So, I contend, and very many philosophers have contended, these values must come from a higher source, either some sort of metaphysical realm such as Brahman, or Tian, which is heaven in Chinese, or from a creator figure who established them when he created the universe. And we'll get into that a bit more. Why is a creator necessary? It frees you from a worldview in which everything is merely a matter of personal perception. It acknowledges that there is an objective truth that we can know. Well, that's my learning disability right there, doing the wrong no. But I mean can no. So yeah, if there is an objective moral truth, then that means morality is not merely subjective. Morality isn't merely a matter of personal taste. Gravity is not a matter of personal taste because you can reliably do things based on it. For instance, like you can fire a rocket from Earth, and if you calculate it using gravity and physics, you can have it orbit around Pluto, which is extremely far distance away, and it's not going to get there by accident. Spaceflight wouldn't work if there weren't objective physical laws that you can obey. So I'm arguing that in this, just as there are objective physical laws, there are objective metaphysical laws. The basic numerous attempts, though, have been made to provide secular alternatives to divinely ordained morality. The basic problem for them is they either take for granted that objective morality exists without saying why, like humanism. Why are people equal? In Christianity, there's a basic equality that comes from everyone having a soul and everyone being human. That's not to say everyone's the same, that's not to say we need open borders or anything, but there's a basic moral equality, meaning it's bad to rape and murder a black person for no reason, much as it's bad to rape and murder a white person for no reason. That comes from the fact that they both have a soul and are both created in the image of God, and deism would posit something similar. Humanism posits the same thing to an even greater extent than Christianity does, but there's no reason for it. There's no explanation. Why should I do it? Which is a political argument I often get into people because they're like, we need to let in the third world immigrants into Europe. And I'm like, why? And they will say, oh, because it's the right thing to do because of our common humanity. And I'll say, well, you're obviously not religious. So if you don't believe in any sort of moral order, you don't believe that despite the bad actions on Earth you will be rewarded in an afterlife, why? Why shouldn't I just say no? Because they're going to destroy my country. Now, I'm not in favor of that anyways, but my point is, why wouldn't I go and enslave another society? Why wouldn't I rape and pillage? You're trying to appeal to common humanity, but common humanity can be pretty shitty. People are quite capable of doing horrific things to each other, and that's also part of humanity. Trying to conquer the world and exploiting its resources is part of our common humanity. Why someone would appeal to that, I don't know. Also, they have no ground for which to accept it. If you're using a religious basis, you can say, well, your eternal soul rests on it, or you need to seek the truth, or you need to be in line with the rules of the universe. But in the case of humanism and a lot of these kind of like new left ideas, I don't understand why. There's no reason to follow them aside from personal preference or just emotionalism. So I think the best means of proving this is to look at some of the alternatives and see the problems with them. It's kind of interesting, though, that humanism and a lot of other secular ideas tend to try and prove that they have the same values as organized religion. They will say, oh, we can be perfectly moral too. Atheists could be equally moral to religious people. Well, where does this idea of morality come from? It's I don't know. They don't have an answer for that, generally speaking. So they'll say we have the same values as Christians. We can be just as moral. We can support things like the married family. We can support universal human rights. We can be against murder while still being atheists. So the question is, if you think religion's bullshit, then why are you attempting to copy its moral system? Why are you attempting to convince people that you have the same moral system of something you believe is fake, and that you have disdain for? I don't really get it. But anyways, let's look at some alternatives. Objection 1 to the moral argument is that evolution provides a moral system. A common objection is that evolutionary biology provides an objective moral system. How it's objective, I don't know. Based on cooperation to ensure the survival of one's genes. This is from Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. It's commonly considered that the purpose of life is merely to pass on your genes. There is no higher purpose. There is no morality aside from passing on your genes. So civilization makes that more likely because it reduces murder, infant mortality, it provides a stable society where people don't starve, etc., and that makes it more likely for people to pass their genes on. A problem, though, is that the people who advocate this form of biological reductionism deny the existence of race, ethnicity, the role of biology, etc. Despite the fact that there are clearly immense biological differences between people, even down to things like just allergies. That's a biological difference. IQ is a biological difference. Physical ability is a biological difference. So I find the majority of people who are biological reductionists also hold to this humanistic idea that biology doesn't exist. So they're reductionistic about something they don't believe in, and it's rather strange. Now, you could say that's an ad hominem attack, and I guess it is to some degree, but I think I'm just trying to show that they don't really believe it. And I know the fact that someone doesn't believe in something doesn't mean it's false, but I think it shows it's flawed if the situation that the majority of people who advocate something actively don't or can't believe in it. It's just that unappealing to them. Furthermore, I fail to see how under this system things like polygamy, exterminating other ethnic groups, slavery, and any number of other horrors are not permitted. Genghis Khan raping half the world, for instance, would be seen as the ultimate morally correct action, as he ensured hundreds of millions carry his genes. Genghis Khan is essentially the ultimate winner in history, because he basically conquered and raped half the world, and he has hundreds of millions of people. I forget what percentage of the world has some version of his genes. So he won. I don't see how Nazism is not the morally correct thing, because it's exterminating rivals. If everyone else on Earth other than Germans was exterminated, then the German people would have a much higher percent chance of passing their genes on. They would be able to occupy and colonize all the world and fill the world with their progeny. So, at very least, I don't see how it doesn't lead to ethnic groups exterminating one another. And on an even smaller level, why does it lead to families exterminating other people? Because if you kill everyone else on Earth except for your family, then everyone on Earth and all humans in the future will carry your genes. And thus, as long as humanity exists at all, your genes will be passed on. So Darwin himself had a mental breakdown over this issue. I recommend the book Darwin's Doubt, which is written by a Catholic. I think it's George Weigel? I'm not sure, or was it... I forget. It was written by a Catholic, kind of Catholic conservative theologian / professor. It was a very good book. He doesn't deny evolution. He denies Darwinian evolution in a couple particular instances. So Darwin was a lifelong liberal who was very much against slavery and advocated human rights. He was an abolitionist. He was a noted abolitionist. He advocated human rights. After formulating evolutionary theory, though, he had an experience where he saw a group of ants enslave another group of ants. And he realized that slavery is natural. And he reluctantly had to end his abolitionism. And he had to end his belief in universal rights, and end his his moral thing. And then near the end of his life, he started saying about how the inferior races will be wiped out by the superior races, etc. And that's where social Darwinism came from. And people like to pretend Darwin didn't come up with it, but he did come up with it. He didn't like it, but he did. So I recall Richard Dawkins during an interview, and I bring up Richard Dawkins just because he has a big mouth, and he kind of talks, and he's kind of a good foil. So Dawkins admitted there's no grounds for condemning the Holocaust, and indeed ethnic cleansing in general. It can be seen as a form of biological rationalism, because there is no objective morality. All you have is a bundle of your own perceptions and a bundle of your own preferences. You may have a preference for the Holocaust not happening, etc. And I know probably a lot of people who are watching my channel will say, stop bringing up the Holocaust, we hear about that all the time. This is intended to be a bit more popular, and to most people, that is the thing that really comes to mind when they think of evil. So the second objection is that humanism or utilitarianism can deal with it. So the idea is we should just do what is in the best interest of humanity, and that the flourishing of conscious creatures should be the goal. Essentially, it's a moral system similar to Christianity or some other major religions, but absent God. The problem is, without some sort of unchanging moral reality beyond that of this world, the best interest of humanity comes down to personal taste. Once again, executing all degenerates, and the alternative, promoting degeneracy, can both seen as improving humanity. Like someone could say, transspeciesism will make humanity stronger, transhumanism will make people better. The people who think that this will have consequences and is immoral and will lead to a degeneration of society, they're just haters. They're just kind of antiquated and old-fashioned. So the best interest of humanity is once again an entirely subjective concept. You could just say, okay, well, let's just exterminate all the disabled people, because that would make society better, and their genes being removed is in the best interest of humanity. So many humanists create moral codes, but beyond being persuasive, there's no real force behind them. Someone can accept them or not. There's no immortality. There's no ultimate meaning to any of their actions, so therefore there's no virtue. For instance, if I was to reject humanism and start killing people and taking their money, there would be no ultimate punishment for my actions and no cosmic standard to contrast them with. Some people like Stalin and Mao just get away with it, and they live happy, fulfilling lives and die. Whereas people who do good often live horrendous lives, like the millions of victims those two men left in their wake. So the third objection is one I increasingly hear, which is legal positivism. Positivism, in this sense, I believe means whatever government or the people determine law is. So judges can make law, people can make law, governments can make law, and whatever the law says is what is objectively morally correct. The problem is no one actually believes in this, except for a couple mainstream conservatives believe in this, and it's always disturbing to run across people who do. So basically, people only believe in legal positivism when it agrees with them. If the Supreme Court decides in favor of gun rights, then conservatives will be in favor of legal positivism. If it rules in favor of gay marriage, then liberals will be in favor of legal positivism. If Rob Ford wins an election, then liberals are against legal positivism. If Obama wins an election, conservatives are against legal positivism. So it's basically an irrelevant position, because I contend almost no one believes in it. There's a couple people who will be like, well, they voted, and I have to accept what they voted on. But generally speaking, people don't. Also, it's just based on arbitrariness. It's like 1984. The government can just declare things. They can say water is dry and sand is wet, or something like that, and a legal positivist would be fine with that because it was done in a legitimate way. So this brings us to the concept of immortality of the soul, which I think is at the core of the moral argument. So virtually all conceptions of God, with the exception of the Sadducees, who were a first century Jewish sect, who believed in God but didn't believe there was an afterlife. So virtually all conceptions of God, all religions, and all peoples hold that there is some sort of afterlife, and that adherence to moral principles affects one place in said afterlife. I just realized I did the wrong effect. While immortality of the soul is to some extent a separate issue, I believe that an afterlife is a given if God exists and he is interested in us, morally speaking. There's a variety of reasons, including the idea that a good God could not allow the annihilation. And that's actually where the doctrine of hell largely stems from in Christianity, because the human soul is so precious, and the continued existence of a human is so important. That's partially where the idea of hell comes from. That God will not allow the human soul to be destroyed. We'll talk about hell later on. It's not what most people think it is. It's rather different. So, a just God cannot allow annihilation, because it's literally the worst thing possible that can happen to a human. And if there is no immortality, God doesn't really have any way to enforce virtue. Because obviously there's no justice in the world, because guys like Mao and Stalin get off. I will readily admit that the world is not a just, kind, or fair place. All sorts of terrible things happen, people are not punished. Thus, if immortality does not exist, if people are not ultimately punished in some other world, then there is no virtue. There is no ultimate punishment for anything. You just kind of get off scot-free. So as previously stated, if there's no immortality, there's no virtue, no ultimate meaning to anything. So why is this? All men must die, as they say in Game of Thrones, Valar Morghulis, and all men will die. If there is no immortality, then the actions of our lives have no meaning as being good versus bad, because there is no ultimate benefit. Eventually you will fade away. Even the most famous people in history, Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare, eventually they will fade into the past and be forgotten. It doesn't really matter if you're remembered or not, because if there is no soul, if there is no mortality, then you are annihilated. When you die, you cease to be able to think, to reflect, to care. If I don't exist anymore, why would I care whether or not people remember me? It may seem comforting on a base level, but it's really just a way to try and avoid thinking about the prospect of annihilation, of ceasing to exist. And to me, there's nothing more terrifying or nothing more horrific than forever losing your consciousness, for literally ceasing to exist. So who cares? Because eventually the Earth will fade away, humanity will end with the heat death of the universe, and there will be no evidence that you ever existed if there is no immortality. In Gladiator, the tagline for Gladiator is, the things we do in life echo in eternity. But if there is no eternity, then the things we do in life don't echo. They have a very short-term, finite effect on people. In the end, you will be dead, your family will be dead, the Earth will be dead, the stars will be dead, and humanity itself will be dead. And no one will remember you, no one will care if there is no immortality. Thus, I believe if God exists and he is good to any extent, then the soul exists and part of man is immortal. So in summary, I don't believe there is any basis for objective moral values, and all morality and questions of good and evil are purely subjective and relative. Beyond personal taste, there is no reason to object or support anything. Thus, to reject the existence of God is, in my belief, to reject objective morality. There are alternatives to this, like I said, as we're going to get into right now. Non-theistic supernatural moral systems. One could imagine a moral system like the Chinese concept of heaven or heaven, or the Hindu concept of Brahman, where there is indeed an objective moral system without God, as he is being defined here. I acknowledge that possibility. That's more plausible than a lot of alternatives. Some non-theists will accept that, or they will try to advocate reincarnation and karma as being a alternative, and to me that seems like a possible alternative versus naturalism, which doesn't at all seem possible to me. So yeah, that's a possibility. Eastern religions do make some degree of sense. My problem with that is, in a non-theistic supernatural universe, there's no creator. Back when we thought the universe was eternal, or it oscillated and repeated itself, that idea was probable. It was plausible, it was probably probable even. But since there is not an answer to the cosmological argument, unless they resort to having a creator, but the creator just kind of screws off and doesn't do anything, in which case it's basically the same idea. I think in Chinese thought, there is a creator of the universe, of heaven, named Shangdi or something or other. He's just not mentioned very often. But heaven exists and heaven has a creator. The focus is just on heaven, but they still have an answer to the cosmological problem. So it's possible, but ultimately I don't see how they get past that. So what does this reveal about God? The existence of a divinely ordained morality reveals to us that God has taken, to at least some extent, a personal interest in us as human beings, and trying to give us a way to live. This indicates he is not merely a blind watchmaker, but is actively interested and cares about humanity to a certain extent, as he has left us a guide. He did not merely create us and leave us alone. He didn't kick us out of the nest and leave us with no guidance. He gave us directions in our life. So how is this related to other arguments? This is closely related to the design argument, as part of the design for the universe is morality. It also relates to the idea that God created life, or created the conditions for life to come into existence, because there was morality waiting for us upon our creation. The universe is set up to have the backbone, so to speak, to so that when life came into existence, it had this moral code and this moral foundation waiting for us. So to me, that reinforces the design argument. These two combined shows us about God that he is interested and cares about us. And we'll get into the argument from beauty next. And the argument for beauty seems to imply that beauty was created by God because he likes beauty and wants us to enjoy it. So there we go. That is the moral argument. Next time we'll probably do beauty. This is Argent Templar signing out.